Good morning. Thank you for joining us at the last talk of our 20th annual Town History Series at the Patent Free Library. My name is Mary Kate Kwasnick, and I'm the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian in the Sagadahoc History and Genealogy Room here at the Patent Free Library. And I'm so pleased that you could join us here today. Before I introduce you to today's speaker, I have a few important bits of information to share. This year's series, in its 20th iteration, is dedicated to Peter Goodwin. Peter was a longtime history room manager, Bath Historical Society trustee, and the founder of the Town History Series. This series began in 2005, and since then, Peter worked tirelessly to build momentum year after year to bring us to where we are today. Our community looks forward to these talks every year, and it's because of Peter's dedication and that of his successors that we're here today. I also want to thank all of the historical societies and member towns for selecting our fabulous speakers and getting the word out, specifically today, the West Bath Historical Society. Thank you also to the Bath Historical Society for offering to professionally film the series. So if you're with us in person today, please note that the speaker is being filmed by a camera at the back of the room. This recording will be available in our collection on DVD, and it will be available for checkout. The Zoom recording of today's program will be available on our YouTube page next week. If you're joining us on Zoom, please note that this is a Zoom webinar, so you cannot unmute or turn on your camera, but you can use the chat and the Q&A feature. If you would like to enable closed captioning, please click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen to turn them on. And please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A feature during the talk, and at the end of the talk, I'll let Liz know your questions. Also, if you're on Zoom, you won't be able to hear the questions from the crowd since the audience doesn't have microphones, but Liz will repeat them and I will type them into the chat as they're being asked. Our speaker today represents West Bath, the West Bath Historical Society. Liz is the granddaughter of Sam and Catherine Armstrong and the daughter of Dick and Doris Armstrong, the family who founded a wholesale shellfish business that evolved into the new Meadows Inn in West Bath. Liz grew up in Brunswick, and her first job at the new Meadows Inn was putting cardboard tops on tiny glass creamer bottles while sitting on a stool in the coffee shop. Eventually, Liz was promoted to mowing the lawns, chambermaiding, dishwasher duty on busy holidays, cooking and baking, and finally working her way onto the floor and waitressing through her high school and college years. Liz spent the majority of her career in Maine, working in environmental policy, regulation, and remediation before becoming a development officer, first at Colby College and now at Bowdoin College. In addition, Liz's family recently donated the New Meadows Inn archival collection to the West Bath Historical Society, which is housed in the history room. So some of what you'll see is from that collection. Welcome, Liz.
Just as we get started, I want to say thanks so much to the West Bath Historical Society for being interested in the archival information that we had. And probably 90% of what I'm going to present today is in the collection and available to anybody who wants to look at it. Mary Kate would be your gal. And thank you, Mary Kate, for everything you've done to make this talk come together for us. So I've done a lot of work here. Mostly I had said I was just mostly going to talk about the Armstrongs' connection to the new Meadows Inn, but I really couldn't do this topic justice if I didn't spend more time talking about the original New Meadows Inn, which was so well known. So that's where I'm going to start. And most of this is sort of new information to me. Oopsie, no, let's make sure there we go. Okay. So well, first of all, also, this is like a tale of two cities. It's a tale of two entrepreneurs, two different locations of the business called the New Meadows Inn. And the first one was Charles Cahill. And he founded this original New Meadows Inn. I just found out by getting his obituary off the New York Times yesterday, was born in about 1871. And passed away at 75. So when he started this, it was around 1898, 1899. He really was in his late 20s. And this is a photo from a postcard and taken from sort of the East Brunswick side, which said on it that it was from Pinson's Boatyard. So I don't think any of us remember Pinson's Boatyard. I'd never heard of it before, but I believe it must have been accessed from the Harding Road, which at one time went all the way through to the old, well, what we call the old Bath Road, but was the Bath Road. So this is a great article from the Times Record back in 2016 in their Remember When series. They used the time of when this was founded, the original in 1898. You'll see 1898, 1899, who's to know? But it was originally 3.5 stories. And it was built on, according to the article, a large plot of land owned by both Charles Cahill and Scott Fry. And I thought it was fascinating. I never knew this. They leased the land that ran south along the river all the way to the Bull Rock Bridge, so they could basically make sure that nobody else could build a resort there. Very, very smart. So one of the things that made the original New Meadows Inn so successful was it had a great location. It had the river. People could come by boat, and people could obviously come by car, horse and buggy, foot, trolley, or train. And the Main Central Railroad, which of course you can still see the railroad crossing the New Meadows River, put up a flag stop right after Charlie Cahill started the inn. And so basically there was a New Meadows station. So you can sort of see over on the far left what is the railroad and trolley tracks, which ran kind of close to each other there, bringing people to the inn. And I have a little piece over here you can look at later, which used to be in my father's restaurant, talks about the trolley. But here's a little tidbit. What's old is new again. Diners would take an electric trolley from Bath for 5 cents with cars running every half hour in the summer. And they had their own float, and people could come in their own boats, or they could take excursion boats from Portland to get there. Now here's apparently their boat, which is just beautiful. So again, thanks to local newspapers, we can find out a lot about the original New Meadows Inn. These are some images that are in the history room now. And I thought, I was thinking the Jordan Pond House, people are outside, eating, but no, they're waiting to get in. So they would arrive, and then they would go in and tell the receptionist cashier, they were there, and she would keep a list, and then she would eventually, call them in. So these are some things that I think patrons of my father's restaurant gave him, which were things from the original New Meadows Inn that they had. And I thought that this little poem over on the left was something that a customer had written. But no, I think actually it was the New Meadows Inn of Charlie Cahill who wrote it. It's really quite cute. And then in my father's iteration of the inn, he used the images of Gibson girls in his menu to kind of harken back to the old original New Meadows Inn. And this is just a great picture of some of the wait staff dressed really as Gibson girls. They were Gibson girls. So they were very well loved, and so were the dogs that they had at the original New Meadows Inn. And Sancho is on the left, and we gave some teacups and some little saucers that were apparently sold as souvenirs at the original New Meadows Inn that actually feature Sancho on them. So he was apparently quite beloved. And then they had another dog that everybody knew and loved, and poor handsome Dan disappeared, made it into the newspaper that he was missing. And sadly, eventually they found that he had fallen down a well and drowned. The original New Meadows Inn actually never really had lodgers. It reportedly was opened and maybe was open for a couple of winters, but then really was a seasonal business. So someone gave this to my father, and it hung in his business for a long time. And it's a very unusual photo taken in the winter of somebody walking on a shoveled boardwalk to the inn, the original inn. So sadly, I have this image is on the back framed. The inn, which had been in operation at that time for about 38 years, was closed for the winter in 1937, and it caught fire. And the firefighting people who arrived were unable to save it because it was low tide and they couldn't get the water to the structure. So I always heard that there were two theories about what had happened and why it had caught fire. And one was that, quote, hobos got inside and lit the stove to get warm, and then it just ignited the whole place. And then the other was that maybe it was because it was in the height of the Depression, and during bad times, people aren't going out to eat. It could have been burned down for insurance proceeds. Just a point of order here, Mr. Cahill at the end of the New Meadows Inn's life was no longer in active operation of it or managing it. So it's from newspaper articles that I'll show you in a little bit. Nobody really knew who was. Oh, here's that article. So this is a great article. It was written after Mr. Cahill had passed away. He passed away sometime in late March or early April of 1945. I just think this is a priceless article because it says, you know, he served for 2 or 3 terms as mayor of Bath, like who's counting? But that was perfectly all right with us. You know, he was obviously a beloved figure. But most people didn't remember him as the mayor. They remembered him as the originator or the promoter of the genuine shore dinner. And then they go on to say, as that special collection of, I don't even know how to pronounce this, viands, is called along the coast of Maine, where true believers refuse recognition to anything that includes panfish or crab meat. So a thing I love about this is he only had one menu. It was one thing. You came there for the shore dinner. There were no substitutions, but you could repeat and have as many different, you know, servings of any aspect of it that you liked. And it cost 50 cents, but eventually went up to $1.75. So this article is the place where it said he had turned over the management to the inn to others, and it speculates that he may no longer have owned it when it was lost. So enter Sam Armstrong, my grandfather. This is, I don't know what time, date the photo is of him, but he was reportedly a snappy dresser. And I didn't know him. I was born after he had passed away. But this is a postcard image of the inn around the time frame when he owned it or shortly thereafter. So in my life growing up, I knew there was this other inn, but I thought it had been like, you know, back in the 1800s. I really didn't piece together in my mind that it really had happened. It had burned down just a short time before my family got involved with their version of it in a slightly upriver location. So 8 years after the original place burned down, they bought this 1.4 acre lot, which was then fronting US Route 1 and the New Meadows River. And my grandfather started with a lobster pound there. And he may have had the lobster pound earlier. I've seen images that indicate that maybe they were there earlier in the 40s with a lobster pound, but it probably would have been leased land because I did go to the Registry of Deeds and they didn't own property there before 1945. So my grandfather, Sam Armstrong, was born in Cambridge, Mass. in 1896. His parents were originally from Machias, and they moved to Cambridge to run this grocery store. And census records show that they moved in 1910 to Rhode Island. And I think my grandfather probably had to be in his early teens in this photo. So he was apparently an entrepreneur as a teenager. He had his own piccalilli and relish business. And this is I don't know if this was like an invoice or an order form or what, but I love the fact that he was the manufacturer of superior quality table relishes, not just your average or your poor quality, but superior. And I just love it because you can see the date here on the far right. It's 191, fill in the year. So we know that this was, you know, before 1920. So he's in Rhode Island. He somehow meets Catherine O'Rourke, who's 5 years older than he is, and marries her in 1915. This is a photo, you know, I don't know, photography in 1914 might not have been so great. It has a big sort of sunspot across it or overexposure, but that's the happy couple over there in their courting years. Their first child, Sam Jr., was born in August of 1916, and their last child and 5th daughter, Carol, was born in 1930. So the story has it in our family that while Sam was serving in World War I, his mother decided to convert the business, the relish business, into a near beer business because Prohibition was coming. And before he got home from the war, it had failed. So happy times coming back from World War I. Sam and his wife and Sam Jr. moved to Boston, and Sam was working on the piers there, provisioning ships. By 1923, he and Katie, we called my grandmother Catherine Katie, had 5 children, and they were living in Medford. And post-World War I, there was a beef shortage. And so he came up with this idea of shipping fish to Chicago. And I had the support of the governor of Illinois for this thing. So this photograph on the left is hilarious, in my opinion. It's a publicity shot for this fish shipping business. And the guy handing the fish out of the unrefrigerated rail car is my grandmother's brother, William O'Rourke, who's been, kind of called in to look dapper and hand a fish to this beautiful woman who just happens to be on the side of the rails there, dressed in her flock stole and her beautiful hat with her hand on her hip. And apparently she was a early movie starlet. So this was actually very successful business until Sam got bolder vision and thought he could expand the business beyond Chicago, further west. And the governor told him, "Don't do it, Sam. You're shipping fish in unrefrigerated rail cars. And, you can track your fish down." He was always on trains. He was never home trying to find his fish. And he says, "Leave Chicago and heads west. There's so many rail lines, you'll never find your fish." But he didn't heed that advice, and he borrowed money on margin. And then the stock market crashed. And that was the end of that business. So he's had his second business failure. And during the 30s, he partnered with others running several nightclubs in Boston. One was called Club Baghdad. But by the 1940s, he'd formed a partnership with Pine and Armstrong. Don't know much about that, but this little, actually it's not little, but I shrunk it. It's a button about Pine and Armstrong operating on Long Island, Maine. That was in my grandmother's secretary, and I apparently typed it. Sorry about that. My cousins are in the back. So the summer of 42, he was out on Long Island, and Katie was out on Long Island, and some of the kids were out on Long Island. Sam was, working out there. There was a lot going on during World War II on Long Island with the military operations and, soldiers being billeted there. And so in addition to whatever else they were doing, provisioning, war vessels, my grandfather was also running the Long Island Inn, which was, providing food to the service members. And that's a picture my grandmother snapped of my father. And on the back, she describes that here's Dick, putting a button in his buttonhole, coming back from the garden. She notes that Bobby and Tom are on the island celebrating their honeymoon. That's my father's older sister. So Sam also came to Bath around this time to operate a food cafeteria at Hyde Windlass during World War II, which was operating, of course, 7 days a week, 3 shifts around the clock. So I don't know, as I said, I've seen that he was in the early 40s running this lobster pound. And he also was a lobster broker up in New Harbor. And as someone told me earlier this morning, he knew from Charlie Cahill Jr. that my grandfather had approached him to say, "Can I use the name New Meadows Inn?" and was given permission to do so. So his business here was originally called S.L. Armstrong and Sons, and then eventually was also referred to as New Meadows Lobster. So again, thanks to local news coverage, by 1946, they had expanded the business to include this building on the river behind that building that holds 16 tanks for 22,000 pounds of lobster and a shucking room for clams, which they were going to create a restaurant division and attach it to that building. And the restaurant was going to be built to accommodate 100 people. And their plan was to offer shore dinners. But they wanted to offer more than just shore dinners. So they came up with a varied menu that offered other things. So eventually this business became the New Meadows Inn, and the lobster pound business was taken over by my uncle, Sam Armstrong Jr. Now here's a picture of Sam and Katie. They purchased land across the street from the lobster pound and the restaurant division. And they built a home for themselves and their youngest daughter, Carol. Everybody else was pretty up and out at that point. And they developed a motor court on the property consisting of 8 cabins that are little white cabins around this sort of horseshoe-shaped drive. And behind the house were 2 duplex log cabins. And my grandmother actually ran this operation because Sam was busy on the other side of the street. So here's a picture of it after they finished the construction from the newspaper story. Great high quality photo, love the cars. And then this is not such a great high quality photo. It's a very poor resolution, but an early picture of the house and the cottages. And this is something, thank goodness for Fred Kerber, my longtime friend and former junior high teacher, who kind of went over some of the details of things with me the other day. And I was saying, you know, we were talking about where the original New Meadows Inn was. And my cousin Kate, who can't be here today, told me that she used to play in the ruins of the original New Meadows Inn, and they were behind my grandmother's house. So I never really had looked at this aerial photo, but there are the ruins right there. And then you can see, I tried to call out, there's where the lobster pound was. That the article was mentioning. So this had to be, you know, in the 40s. So this is just a little bit about the lobster pound business, which was taken over by my uncle. And my uncle moved New Meadows lobster to Cundy's Harbor. He was the first dealer to ship sizable quantities of lobster through the Northeast and down to Fulton Fish Market in New York City. In 51, he moved the operations to the Portland Pier on the waterfront in Portland and expanded into a frozen products line called Windswept Frozen Foods. He operated this for 37 years. And I'll just note that location where he had his business on the Portland Pier is where Luke's Lobster is now. So if you go down for a meal at Luke's, you're sitting where the old New Meadows Lobster used to be. So this is a photo in the house, my grandparents' house. This was taken, I believe, in 1953. Even though the majority of their children never really lived in this house, it was home. And it was a place of homecoming for many years, even after my grandfather's passing. And probably the biggest thing that people came back for was Thanksgiving. It was kind of de rigueur. You had to have a good excuse not to be at Thanksgiving. And personally, I only had to come from Brunswick. And I kind of thought that song, Over the River and Through the Woods, was written about my grandmother's house. And the turkeys were cooked at the inn. And I think that my aunts did most of the side dishes, and my grandmother was the one who made the mincemeat pie. And this is her mincemeat recipe. Thank God my Aunt Bobby got it from her. But when I always thought it was delicious, but when I look at the list of ingredients, I'm kind of sickened. So the inn continued to evolve, and a new section closer to the river was built. And they put a cocktail lounge in there. And in order to get a liquor license from the state of Maine, you had to have 10 hotel rooms. So they put 10 hotel rooms upstairs. And 5 of them looked towards the house and cottages, and 5 of them looked towards the river. And they were the tiniest hotel rooms ever. I mean, they were just to get the liquor license, basically. And then they had a construction project in the summer of 55 to add the coffee shop where the original lobster pound business had been. And these are pictures of the river room. You can see the cocktail lounge in the picture on the lower right. And on the left, I love this picture because it shows these paintings, which are above the windows and above the fireplace. And my grandparents used to have local artists allowed to display their works there. And they could sell them, you know, there at the end on behalf of the artists. And their favorite artist was Parker Gamage from New Harbor. And it's funny, my cousins are here today, and almost all of us have a Parker Gamage painting that has come to us from our family, our aunts and uncles who loved Parker Gamage. And my Aunt Carol was notably the most successful salesperson for Parker Gamage. So my grandfather passed away. He suffered a massive stroke. He was 59 years old in late September, lived for about 2 weeks. And this is his funeral notice. And family lore had it that he was driving a waitress home when he had the stroke. And I don't know if this is true or not, if somebody said this, but that he actually continued to drive home. I was like, how the heck did that happen? So poor Dick Armstrong got pressed into service and had to relocate from Massachusetts with my mother, his wife Doris, to help his mother run this business. And by the early 60s, I guess he decided he was going to stick with it. And Katie had enough confidence in him that she transferred the business and the real estate to him. And he went on and ran it for almost 40 years. And that's him with my parents' dog, Mamie. So Katie continued to live across the street from the inn until the summer of 74 when she had a stroke. And she died a few months later. This is Katie with my cousins, Judy and Susie. Susie's here today with her husband and her dog, Giselle. Everybody loves dogs on the New Meadows River, I think. So, after Katie died, my Aunt Lois moved into the house, and she worked at the inn with my father for probably close to 2 decades as the food and beverage manager. So here's an early menu that has Dick Armstrong all over it. He actually drew those images, when I think they look very much like the illustrations from like the Robert McCluskey books, you know. And I love the inside of the menu because it just cracks me up that not only can you get a full shore dinner number 10 for like $5.25 or something, but it comes with salad, homemade rolls, dessert, beverages. Yeah, you needed like a full day to digest your meal. And this is a sort of later iteration of a placemat that had been used at the inn for as long as I could remember, which my dad loved to sail, and he was very interested in the history of the city of ships and paid a lot of attention to, its heritage as the first boat builder, Popham, and all the major vessels that have been built at Bath Iron Works and Percy Small. And so he drew a lot of different kinds of sailing vessels and then the rigging of them. And, it layered on sort of the history of the area relative to its shipbuilding. So here he is, the innkeeper himself. I say it's during the heyday, probably sometime in the 70s. This, I think, was taken in here at Bath. I think it was at Dick Armstrong's house. Many of you may remember him. And he was the then executive director of the Pine Tree Society for Crippled Children. And he, I think, had just married Jane Gannett. This was second marriage for both of them. I posted this on Facebook because it was my father's birthday last week, and I said, he looks like he's feeling no pain. So what does one do when you're faced with an existential business crisis? Some of you may know what this is. It's an aerial photo of the construction of US Route 1. So in the 30s, during the WPA, they built State Road, what we call State Road, but referred to as US Route 1. And New Meadows Inn, the new version of New Meadows Inn, my family's vision, really benefited from the fact that if anybody was going anywhere down east, they had to go on Route 1. There was no 95, there was no, so they had to drive by, and if they were hungry, they stopped. And then once they stopped, they were like, well, next time we're going to make sure we're hungry and stop. So we had a great business for many years, and then all of a sudden they're going to like eliminate the major path that people took right by the business and put in this highway. And my father was terrified. So what did he do? He like kind of doubled down. He didn't say this back in the day, but he ended up deciding that he was going to borrow money, and he was going to put on a major addition and create a function space so that they could have all kinds of weddings and gatherings, and it could become a destination for more local people to come to, and hopefully continue to have people drive by. And many of you may remember back before we banned billboards along the new highway telling you how to get to New Meadows Inn. And I believe that the road that's now called New Meadows Road was not called that. He petitioned to have that road name changed. So it could say, come to the New Meadows Inn, take the New Meadows exit. It must have been Foster's Point Road. Was it Foster's Point Road? I don't know. Maybe Dick Redland might know. So he did a lot of historical research, and when the inn opened with the new banquet facility, he decided to call the room the Tontine Room. And it was really a nod to a famous hotel in Brunswick, which I love the description of the Tontine House or hotel in Brunswick. Mostly the fact that, I didn't say this in the write-up here, but the wood stoves wouldn't be lit before the customers arrived. Only after the people arrived for the night would they light the stoves, so people were freezing in the room. And they just had commodes, of course, no toilets. But at that time, it was reported to be, unsurpassed in elegance and spaciousness. And again, it burned down. I have to say this photograph of the inn, I think I worked that wedding. So this is what it looked like on a postcard from the 70s. Did not reproduce well here, but you'll note that the Tontine Room's to the far left. The center is where the old coffee shop used to be. And when it opened in its new version of itself, that's where the Aliquippa Lounge was. and that had been named after a historic hotel from Small Point. And then the main part of the business that used to have that funny little doorway, he named the Alameda Room, which I called my sister when I was putting this together, and I said, wasn't that dining room called something? I can't remember. And so we figured it out. It was after the Alameda House that had been here in Bath. And then the River Room, no lounge in there anymore. So they kind of reconfigured things and created a little private dining room, which they called the Bull Rock Room after the old Bull Rock Bridge. And so this is an aerial photo after the renovation. Kind of different from that photo from the 40s, because you can see old Bath Industrial Sales or what has come in there. And this does not show that there were 20 acres behind the inn that had belonged to the Donnells. And Mr. Donnell had asbestosis, and his wife was looking to sell. My father bought it, the acreage. And from what I understand from the title search that was done back in the day, he told me that the deed went back to King George III, that it had actually been like one of those 1 mile swaths deeded from the king to the Donnells. It went all the way up to Merrymeeting Bay. This is one of the last parcels that was still owned by the Donnells. So I had said that the waitresses at the original New Meadows Inn were beloved. Well, so was the staff at my dad's New Meadows Inn. And this is just a picture of a staff party, probably in the mid to late 80s. And he had an incredibly loyal and wonderful staff. And many people worked there for decades. And I'm so delighted today because Linda's here. And so that was a it was a family. It was a family. Sorry for not naming Jill and Kathy, who are here today too. But you're in the picture, that's right. So my dad got sick in the summer of '94, was diagnosed in October with Lou Gehrig's disease, and ended up passing away in December. And it's a horrible thing to happen to anybody. And in many ways, although we were caught real flat-footed and in a lot of shock, we're all grateful that he didn't have a longer journey with that. And we were so fortunate to have the staff who helped my mother figure out how to run the place. Boyd Bollinger, who was his longtime manager, really helped while my father was ill and then after he passed. And my poor mom, who at 65 inherits this business that she really had never had anything to do with. She'd had her own career. She raised us, and then she went back to work, and she worked for 20 years as a legal secretary at McTay-Kigby. And now she's got this, business with, that she has to cope with and figure out what to do with. She couldn't even really sell it because she didn't quite know what she had to sell. So with the assistance of my brother, Rick, Tashi Armstrong, she operated the business for almost a decade. That's a picture of my mom at her 87th birthday. So while they were trying to operate the business, it was just becoming increasingly difficult. There was a lot of competition. The building was now getting quite old. It needed like a whole capitalization, renovation. And ultimately, the decision was taken to just get out of the public restaurant business. Let's make it just a private restaurant, private function kind of thing. But that was in the summer of 2003, and that pretty soon figured out it couldn't really carry the day. So by January, we had shuttered the business, and we prepared it for sale and sold it that summer. And again, feel very fortunate that we were able to sell it right before they announced the closure of the Naval Air Station, which, for those of you who remember, everything kind of just we were staggered, and all the communities in the area and a lot of different businesses were closing. So now my brother and his wife own the house across the street that was built by Sam and Katie, as well as the cottages. And I just wanted to say something to ponder. When I would drive to the inn when I was a kid with my father, there was this little gray building over there in the circle on the riverfront. And I thought maybe it could be a nice playhouse or something. And I asked my father, what is that? I thought it was on my grandmother's property. And he told me it was the ice house of the old New Meadows Inn. So I ended up the other day after talking to Fred, going out and doing a little reconnaissance, and with binoculars, I could kind of see it, but it's all dilapidated. But there still is a structure there on the waterfront, and it's that structure.